Hey guys, it's Cassidy again, and today we're going to finish up the last part of the Inheritance games. Chapter 85. Avery. Rebecca stared down at me. What are you doing down here? She sounded perfectly normal, but all I could think about was what Rebecca Laughlin was that she'd been on the estate the night Drake shot at me. She didn't have an alibi because when we'd arrived at Wayback Cottage she wasn't there, and neither of her grandparents knew where she was. She'd said something about warning me. The next day Rebecca had looked, according to Thea, like she'd been crying. Why? Where were you? I asked her, my mouth going dry. The night of the shooting. Rebecca closed her eyes. You don't know what it's like, she said softly, to have your entire life revolve around one person, and then you wake up one day and that person is gone. That wasn't an answer to my question. I thought about Thea telling me that she was only doing what Emily would have wanted. What would Emily have wanted Rebecca to do to me? Xander needed to get back here, and quick. It wasn't my fault, you know, Rebecca said up above, her eyes still closed. Emily was taking huge risks. I told our parents. They grounded her, forbade her from seeing the Hawthorns. But Em had her ways. She convinced our mom and dad that she was done acting out, that they didn't lift the ban on the boys, but they started letting her hang out with Thea again. Thea, I repeated, who you were secretly dating. Rebecca's eyelids shot open. Emily found us together after that afternoon. She was angry. As soon as she got me alone, she told me that what Thea and I had wasn't love, that if Thea really loved me, she would never have pretended to be with Xander. Emily said, Rebecca was caught up in memory now, fully, violently. She told me that Thea loved her more, and she would prove it. She asked Thea to cover about the cliff diving. I begged Thea not to, but she said after everything she owed him. Thea had covered for Emily the night she died. Most of the things Emily had talked the boys into she could do, but even professional cliff divers don't jump from the top of Devil's Gate. It would have been dangerous for anyone, but that much adrenaline, that much cortisol, a change in attitude and pressure, with her heart, Rebecca was speaking so softly now that I wasn't sure she was truly sorry. Rebecca was speaking so softly now that I wasn't sure she truly remembered I was listening. I tried telling my parents what she was doing, and that didn't work. I tried begging Thea, and she'd chosen Emily over me. So I decided to go to Jameson. He was the one who was supposed to take her to Devil's Gate. Rebecca's head dipped, deep red hair falling into her face. Thea was right. Rebecca Loughlin was beautiful. But right now she didn't look quite right. I had a voice recording, she said softly, of Emily talking. She used to tell me everything the boys did with her and for her and to her. She liked to keep score. Rebecca paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was sharper edged. I played the recording for Jameson. I told myself that I was doing it to protect my sister, to keep him from taking her to the cliffs. But the truth was, she'd taken Thea away from me. So you took something away from her, I thought. Jameson broke up with her, I said. He told me that much. If he hadn't, Rebecca replied, maybe she wouldn't have needed to push things so much. Maybe she would have relented and jumped from one of the lower cliffs. Maybe it would have been okay. Her voice got softer. If Emily hadn't caught Thea and me together that afternoon, if she hadn't seen our relationship as such a betrayal, she might not have needed to jump at all. Rebecca blamed herself. Thea blamed the boys. Grayson took the weight of all of it onto himself. And Jameson. I'm sorry. Rebecca's apology jarred me from my thoughts. Her tone told me she wasn't talking about Emily anymore. She wasn't talking about something that had happened over a year ago. Sorry for what? I asked. What are you doing down here, Rebecca? It's not that I have anything against you, but it's what Emily would have wanted. She is not well. I had to find a way out of here. I had to get away from her. Emily would have hated you for stealing the money. She would have hated the way they looked at you. So you decided to get rid of me, I said, stalling for time. For Emily. Rebecca stared at me. No. You knew about the tunnels, and somehow you told Drake. No, Rebecca insisted. Avery, I wouldn't do that. You said it yourself. Emily would have wanted me gone. I'm not Emily. The words were guttural. Then what are you apologizing for? I asked. Rebecca swallowed. Mr. Hawthorne told me about the tunnels one summer when I was little. He showed me all the entrances, said I deserved something that was just mine, a secret. I come down here when I need to get away. Sometimes when I'm visiting my grandparents, but since Emily died, things are pretty awful at home, so sometimes I enter from outside. I waited. And? The night of the shooting, I saw someone else in the tunnels. I didn't say anything because Emily wouldn't have wanted me to. I owed her, Avery. After what I did, I owed her. Who did you see? I asked. She didn't answer. Drake? Rebecca met my eyes. He wasn't alone. Who else was there? I waited. Nothing. Rebecca, who else was in the tunnel with Drake? Who would Emily have wanted her to protect? One of the boys? I asked, feeling like the ground was crumbling underneath me. No, Rebecca said quietly. Their mother. Chapter 86. Sky? I tried to wrap my mind around that. She'd never seemed like a threat the way Zara had. Passive-aggressive, sure, and petty, but violent? We're all friends here, aren't we? I could hear her declaring. I made it a policy to befriend everyone who steals my birthright. I could see her holding out a glass of champagne and telling me to drink. Sky was down here with Drake the night of the shooting, I said, making myself confront the implications head on. She gave him access to the estate, probably even pointed him toward the Black Wood. Toward me. I should have told someone, Rebecca said softly. After the shooting, as soon as I realized what I'd seen, I should have spoken up. Yes, that word was razor-sharp, and spoken by someone other than me. You should have. Overhead, Grayson stepped into view. Rebecca turned to face him. It was your mother, Gray. You could have told me, Grayson said quietly. I would have taken care of it, Bex. I doubted Grayson's method of taking care of it would have involved turning his mother over to the police. Drake tried again, I said, staring daggers at Rebecca. You know that, right? He tried to run us off the road. He could have killed me, and Elisa, and Orin, and Thea. Rebecca made a garbled sound the second I said Thea's name. Rebecca, Grayson said, his voice low. I know, Rebecca said, but Emily wouldn't have wanted. Emily's gone. Grayson's tone wasn't harsh, but his words took Rebecca's breath away. Bex, he made her look at him. Rebecca, I'll take care of this, I promise you. Everything is going to be fine. Everything is not fine, I told Grayson. Go, he murmured to Rebecca. She went, and we were alone. Grayson lowered himself slowly into the hidden room. Sanders said you needed me. He'd come. Maybe that would have meant more if I hadn't just had that conversation with Rebecca. Your mother tried to have me killed. My mother, Grayson said, is a complicated woman, but she's family. And he would choose family over me, every time. If I asked you to let me handle this, he continued, would you? I can guarantee that no more harm will come to you or yours. How exactly could he guarantee anything was unclear, but there was no doubt he believed he could. The world bends to the will of Grayson Hawthorne. I thought about the day I'd met him, how sure he'd seemed of himself, how invincible. What if I play you for it? Grayson asked when I didn't reply. You like a challenge, I know you do. He stepped toward me. Please, Avery, give me a chance to make this right. There was no mistake. There was no making this right, but all he'd asked for was a chance. I don't owe him that. I don't owe him anything. But maybe it was the expression on his face, or the knowledge that he'd lost everything to me once. Maybe I just wanted him to see me and think about something other than October 18th. I'll play you for it, I said. What's the game? Grayson's silver eyes held mine. Think of a number, he told me. 1 to 10. If I guess it, you let me handle the situation with my mother my way. If I don't, I turn her into the police. Grayson took half a step toward me. Think of a number. The odds were in my favor here. He had only a 10% chance of guessing this correctly, and I had a 90% chance that he would get it wrong. I took my time choosing. There are certain numbers that people defaulted to. 7, for instance. I could go for an extreme, 1 or 10, but those seem like easy guesses. 8 was on my brain, but from the days we spent solving the numerical sequence. 4 was the number of Hawthorne brothers. If I wanted to keep him from guessing, I needed to go for something unexpected. No rhyme, no reason. 2. Do you want me to write the number down? I asked. On what? Grayson asked softly. I swallowed. How do you know that I won't lie about my number if I get it right? If you get it right. Grayson was quiet for a few seconds, then spoke. I trust you. I knew with every fiber of my being that Grayson Hawthorne didn't trust easily, or much. I swallowed. Go ahead. He took at least as much time generating his guess as I had choosing my number. He looked at me, and I could feel him trying to unravel my thoughts and impulses, to solve me like one more riddle. What do you see when you look at me, Grayson Hawthorne? He made his guess. 2. I turned my head toward my shoulder, breaking eye contact. I could have lied. I could have told him he was wrong, but I didn't. Good guess. Grayson let out a ragged breath, and then I felt him gently turning my face back toward his. Avery. He almost never used my given name. He gently traced the line in my jaw. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again. You have my word. He thought he could protect me. He wanted to. He was touching me, and all I wanted was to let him. Let him protect me, let him touch me, let him... Footsteps. The clattering above pushed me into taking a step back from him, and a few moments later, Xander and Nash climbed down into the room. I managed to look at them, not Grayson. Where's Jameson? I asked. Xander cleared his throat. I can report that some very colorful language was used when I requested his presence. Nash snorted. He'll be here. We waited. 5 minutes, then 10. You might as well unlock yours, Xander told the others. Your hands, if you please. Grayson went first, then Nash. After the touchpad scanned their hands, we heard the telltale sound of deadbolts being thrown, one after the other. 3 locks down, Xander murmured. 1 to go. Another 5 minutes. 8. He's not coming, I thought. Jameson isn't coming, Grayson said, like he'd lifted the thought from my mind. He'll be here, Nash repeated. Don't I always do what I'm told? We looked up, and Jameson jumped. He landed between his brothers and me, going almost to the ground to absorb the shock. He straightened, then met their eyes one at a time. Nash, Xander, Grayson. Then me. You don't know when to stop, do you, Eris? It didn't exactly feel like an indictment. I'm tougher than I look, I told him. He stared at me for a moment longer, then turned to the door. He placed his hand flat on the pad that bore his initials. The last deadbolt was thrown, and the door released. It creaked open, an inch, maybe 2. I expected Jameson to reach for the door, but instead he walked back to the opening and jumped, catching its sides with his hands. Where are you going? I asked him. After everything it had taken to get to this point, he couldn't just walk away. To hell, eventually, Jameson answered. Probably to the wine cellar for now. No, he couldn't just leave. He was the one who dragged me into this, and he was going to see it through. I jumped to catch onto the opening overhead to go after him. I felt my grip slipping. Strong hands grabbed me from beneath. Grayson. He pushed me upward, and I managed to climb out onto my feet. Don't leave, I told Jameson. He was already walking away. When he heard my voice, he stopped but didn't turn back. I don't know what's on the other side of that door, Eris, but I do know that the old man laid this trap for me. Just for you? I said, an edge working its way into my voice. That's why it required all 4 brothers' hands and my face to get this far? Clearly Tobias Hawthorne hadn't meant for all of us to be here. Oh, had meant for all of us to be here. He knew that any game he left, I would play. Nash might say screw it, Grayson might get bogged down in legalities, Xander might be thinking about 1,001 other things, but I would play. I could see him breathing, see him hurting. So yes, he made this for me. Whatever's on the other side of that door. Jameson drew in another ragged breath. He knew. He knew what I did, and he wanted to make sure I never forgot. What did he know? I asked. Grayson appeared beside me and repeated my question. The old man knew what, Jamie? Behind me, I could hear Nash and Xander climbing into the tunnel, but my mind barely registered their presence. I was focused wholly and intensely on Jameson and Grayson. Knew what, Jamie? Jameson turned back to face his brother. What happened on 10/18? It was my fault. Grayson strode forward, taking Jameson's shoulders in his hands. I'm the one who took Emily there. I knew it was a bad idea, and I didn't care. I just wanted to win. I wanted her to love me. I followed you that night. Jameson's statement hung in the air for several seconds. I watched the 2 of you jump, Gray. All of a sudden, I was back with Jameson, headed for the Westbrook. He told me 2 lies and 1 truth. I watched Emily Laughlin die. You followed us? Grayson couldn't make sense of that. Why? I was pissed, Jameson shrugged. Eventually, you ran off to get the towels, and I... Jamie. Grayson dropped his hands to his sides. What did you do? Grayson had told me that he'd left to get the towels, and when he'd gotten back, Emily was lying on the shore. Dead. What did you do? She saw me. Jameson turned from his brother to look at me. She saw me and she smiled. She thought she'd won. She thought she still had me, but I turned and walked away. She called my name, and I didn't stop. I heard her gasp. She was making this little strangling sound. I brought my hand to my mouth in horror. I thought she was playing with me. I heard a splash, but I didn't turn around. I made it probably 100 yards. She wasn't calling after me anymore. And I glanced back. James's voice broke. Emily was hunched over, crawling out of the water. I thought she was pretending. He thought she was manipulating him. I just stood there, Jameson said dully. I didn't do a damn thing to help her. I watched Emily Laughlin die. I thought I was going to be sick. I could see him standing there, trying to show her that he wasn't hers anymore, trying to resist. She collapsed. She went still, and she stayed still. And then you came back, Gray, and I left. Jameson shuddered. I hated you for taking her there, but I hated myself more because I let her die. I stood there and I watched. It was her heart, I said. What could you have? I could have tried CPR. I could have done something. Jameson swallowed. But I didn't. I don't know how the old man knew, but he cornered me a few days later. He told me he knew I'd been there and asked whether I felt culpable. He wanted me to tell you, Gray, and I wouldn't. He said if he was so damn set on you knowing I'd been there, he could tell you himself. But he didn't. Instead, he did this. The letter, the library, the will, their middle names, the date of my birth, and Emily's death. Their numbers scattered all over the estate, the stained glass, the riddle, the passage down into the tunnel, the grate marked M.E., the hidden room, the moving wall, the door. He wanted to make damn sure, Jameson said, that I never forgot. No, Xander blurted out. The others turned to look at him. That's not what all this is, he swore. He wasn't making a point. He wanted us all four to be together. Here. Nash put a hand on Xander's shoulder. The old man could be a real bastard, Xan. That's not what this is, Xander said again, his voice more intense than I'd ever heard it. Like he wasn't speculating. Like he knew. Grayson, who hadn't said a word since Jameson's confession, spoke up now. What precisely are you saying, Alexander? The two of you were walking around like ghosts. You were a robot, Gray. Xander was speaking quickly now, almost too quickly for the rest to follow. Jamie was a ticking time bomb. You hated each other. We hated ourselves more, Grayson said, his voice like sandpaper. The old man knew he was sick, Xander admitted. He told me right before he died. He wanted me to do something for him. Nash's eyes narrowed. And what was that? Xander didn't answer. Grayson's eyes narrowed. You had to make sure we played. It was my job to make sure you saw this to the end. Xander looked from Grayson to Jameson. Both of you. If either of you had stopped playing, it was my job to draw you back. You knew? I said. All this time you knew where the clues led? Xander was the one who'd helped me find the tunnel. He was the one who'd solved the Black Wood. Even back at the very beginning. He told me that his grandfather didn't have a middle name. You helped me, I said. He'd manipulated me, moved me around like a lure. I told you that I'm a living, breathing Rube Goldberg machine. Xander looked down. I warned you, kind of. I thought about the moment he'd taken me to see the machine he'd built. I'd asked him what it had to do with Thea, and his response had been, Who said this had anything to do with Thea? I stared at Xander, the youngest, tallest, and arguably most brilliant Hawthorne. Where you go, he told me back at the gala. They'll follow. All this time, I thought that Jameson was the one who was using me. I thought that he'd kept me close for a reason. It never once occurred to me that Xander had his reasons, too. Do you know why your grandfather chose me? I demanded. Have you known the answer all this time? Xander held his hands up in front of his body like he thought I might throttle him. I only know what he wanted me to know. I have no idea what's on the other side of that door. I was only supposed to get Jamie and Gray here, together. All four of us, Ash corrected, together. I remember what he'd said in the kitchen. Sometimes you gotta excise a wound before it can heal. Was that what this was? Was that the old man's grand plan? Bring me here, spur them into action, hope that the game let the truth come out? Not just the four of us, Grayson told Nash. He looked back toward me. Clearly, this was a game for 5. Chapter 87. We dropped back down into the room one at a time. Jameson had laid his hands flat against the door and pushed it inward. The cell beyond was empty, except for a small wooden box. On the box there were letters. Golden letters, etched into golden tiles that looked like they'd come out of the world's most expensive game of Scrabble. The letters on the box spelled out my name. Avery Kylie Grams. There were 4 blank tiles, one before my first name, one after my last, and 2 separating the names from each other. After everything that had just happened, Jameson's confession, then Xander's, it seemed wrong that this should come down to me. Why me? This game might have been designed to bring Jameson and Grayson back together, to bring secrets to the surface, to bleed out poison before it turned to rot. But somehow, for some reason, it ended with me. Looks like it's your rodeo, kid. Nash nudged me to the box. Swallowing, I knelt. I tried to open the box, but it was blocked. There was no spot for a key, no combination pad. Above me, Jameson spoke. The letters, Eris. He just couldn't help himself. Even after everything, he couldn't stop playing the game. I reached tentatively for the A in Avery. It came off the box. One by one, I peeled off the other letters and the blank tiles, and I realized this was the trigger for the lock. I stared at the pieces, 19 of them total. My name. That clearly wasn't the combination to unlock the box. So what is? Grayson dropped down beside me. He organized the letters, vowels first, consonants in alphabetical order. It's an anagram, Nash commented. Rearranged the letters. My gut response was that my name was just my name, not an anagram of anything, but my brain was already sifting through the possibilities. Avery was easy to turn into words, 2 of them, just by adding a space that had been in front of the name to split it. I placed the tiles back on top of the box, pushing each one into place with a click. A very. I put another space after very. That left 2 blank tiles and all the letters from my middle and last names. Kylie Grams, arranged accordingly to Grayson's method, read AEIBGKLMRSY. Big, balm, bail. I started pulling words out, seeing what each of them left me with, and then I saw it. All at once, I saw it. You've got to be kidding me, I whispered. What? Jameson was 100% in this now, whether he wanted to be or not. He knelt down next to Grayson and me as I put the letters up, one by one. Avery Kylie Grams, the name I'd been given the day I was born, the name Tobias Hawthorne had programmed into the bowling alley and the pinball machine, and who knew how many other places in the house, became, reordered, a very risky gamble. He kept saying that, Xander murmured, that no matter what he planned it might not work, that it was a very risky gamble, Grayson finished, his gaze making its way to me. My name? I tried to process that. First my birthday, now my name. Was that it? How had Tobias Hawthorne even found me? I snapped the last blank tile into place, and the box's lock disengaged. The lid popped open. Inside there were 5 envelopes, one with each of our names. I watched as the boys opened and read theirs. Nash swore under his breath. Grayson stared at his. Jameson let out a broken little laugh. Xander shoved his into his pocket. I turned my attention from the 4 of them to my envelope. The last letter Tobias Hawthorne had sent to me had clearly explained nothing. Opening this note, I expected clarity. How did you find me? Why did you tell me you're sorry? What were you sorry for? There was no paper inside my envelope, and no letter. The only thing it contained was a single packet of sugar. Chapter 88. I placed 2 sugar packets vertically on the table and bring their ends together, forming a triangle capable of standing on its own. There, I say. I do the same with my next 2 pairs, and set a 5th across them horizontal, connecting the 2 triangles I built. Avery Kylie Grams. My mother appears at the end of the table, smiling. What if I told you about building castles out of sugar? I beamed back at her. It's only worth it if you can go 5 stories tall. In my dream, that was where the memory had ended, but this time, holding the memory in my hand, my brain took me one step further. A man eating in the booth behind me glances back. He asks me how old I am. 6, I say. I have some grandsons at home who are just about your age. He says, Tell me, Avery, can you spell your name? Your full name, like your mom said a minute ago. I can, and I do. I met him, I said quietly, just once, years ago, for a moment in passing. Tobias Hawthorne had heard my mom say my full name. He'd asked me to spell it. He loved anagrams more than Scotch, Nash said, and he was a man who loved a good Scotch. Had Tobias Hawthorne mentally rearranged the letters of my name right in that moment? Had it amused him? I thought about Grayson hiring someone to dig up dirt on me, on my mother. Had Tobias Hoffman been curious about me? Had he done the same? He would have kept track of you, Grayson said roughly. A little girl with a funny little name. He glanced at Jameson. He must have known her date of birth. And after Emily died, Jameson was looking at me now, only at me. He thought of you. And decided to leave his entire fortune to me because of his name? I said. That's insane. You're the one who said it, Eris. He didn't disinherit us for you. We weren't getting the money anyway. It was going to charity, I argued. He didn't wait. And you're telling me that on a whim he wiped out the will he'd had for 20 years? He needed something to get our attention, Grayson said. Something so unexpected, so bewildering, that it could only be seen as a puzzle, Jameson finished. Something we couldn't ignore. Something had to wake us up again. And bring us here, all four of us. Something to purge the poison. Nash's tone was hard to read. They'd known the old man. I hadn't. What they were saying, it made sense to them. In their eyes, this hadn't been a win. It had been a very risky gamble. I had been a very risky gamble. Tobias Hawthorne had bet that my presence in the Hawthorne house would shake things up, that old secrets would be laid bare, that somehow, someway, one last puzzle could change everything. That, if Emily's death had torn them apart, I could bring them back together. I told you, kid, Nash said beside me, you're not a player. You're the glass ballerina, or the knife. Chapter 89. Orrin met me the moment I stepped foot into the great room. That he'd been waiting made me wonder why he'd left my side in the first place. Had it really been a phone call, or had Tobias Hawthorne left him with instructions to let the five of us finish the game alone? Do you know what's down there? I asked my head of security. He was more loyal to the old man than he was to me. What else did he ask you to do? Besides the tunnel? Orrin replied. No. He made a study of the voice. Should I? Thought about what had happened down there while Xander was gone. About Rebecca and what she had told me down below. About Sky. I looked at Grayson. His eyes caught mine. There was a question there, and hope. Something else I couldn't read. All I told Orrin was, no. Chapter 89. Orrin met me the moment I stepped foot into the great room. That he'd been... Wait. Oh, here we are. Sorry. That night, I sat at Tobias Hawthorne's desk, the one in my wing. In my hands, I held the letter he'd left me. Dearest Avery, I'm sorry. TTH. I'd wondered what he was sorry for, but I was starting to think that I'd had things reversed. Maybe he hadn't left me the money as an apology. Maybe he was apologizing for leaving me the money. For using me. He brought me here for them. I folded the letter in half and then in half again. This, all of it, had nothing to do with my mom. Whatever secret she'd been keeping, they predated Emily's death. In the grand scheme of things, this entire life-changing, mind-blowing, headline-grabbing chain of events had nothing to do with me. I was just a little girl with a funny name, born on the right day. I have some grandsons at home, I could hear the old man telling me, who are just about your age. This was always about them. I said the words out loud. What am I supposed to do now? The game was over. The puzzle was solved. I'd served my purpose, and I never felt so insignificant in my life. My eyes were drawn to the compass built into the desk surface. As I had my first time in the office, I turned the compass, and the panel on the desk popped up, revealing the apartment underneath. I traced my fingers lightly over the T etched into the wood, and then I looked at my letter. I took Tobias Hawthorne's signature, TTH. My gaze traveled back to the desk. Jameson had told me once that his grandfather had never purchased a desk without hidden compartments. Having played the game, having lived in Hawthorne House, I couldn't help see things differently now. I tested the wood panel on which the T had been etched. Nothing. Then I placed my fingers in the T and I pushed. The wood gave. Click. And then it popped up back into place. T, I said out loud. And then I did the same thing again. Another click. T. I stared at the panel for a long time before I saw it. A gap between the wood and the top of the desk, at the base of the T. I pushed my fingers underneath and found another groove, and above it a latch. I unhooked the latch, and the panel rotated counterclockwise. With a 90-degree turn, I was no longer looking at a T. I was looking at an H. I pressed all 3 bars of the T at the same time. Click. A motor of some kind was engaged, and the panel appeared back into the desk, revealing another compartment underneath. TTH. Tobias Hawthorne had intended for this to be my wing. He'd signed my letter with his initials, not his name. And those initials had unlocked his drawer. Inside, there was a folder, much like the one Grayson had showed me that day at the foundation. My name, my full name, was written across the top. Avery Kylie Grimes. Now that I'd seen the anagram, I couldn't unsee it. Unsure what I would find, or even what I was expecting, I lifted the folder out and opened it. The first thing I saw was a copy of my birth certificate. Tobias Hawthorne had highlighted my date of birth in my father's signature. The date made sense, but the signature? I have a secret, I could hear my mother saying, about the day you were born. I had no idea what to make of that, any of it. I flipped to the next page, and the next, and the next. They were full of pictures, 4 or 5 a year from the time I was 6. They would have kept track of you, I could hear Grayson saying, a little girl with a funny name. The number of pictures went up significantly after my 16th birthday, after Emily died. There were so many, like Tobias Hawthorne had sent someone to watch my every move. You couldn't risk everything on a total stranger, I thought. Technically, that was exactly what he'd done, but looking at the pictures, I was overwhelmed with the sense that Tobias Hawthorne had done his homework. I wasn't just a name and a date to him. There were shots of me playing poker games in the parking lot and shots of me carrying way too many cups at once at the diner. There was a picture of me with Libby when we were laughing, and one where I was standing with my body between hers and Drake's. There was a shot of me playing chess in the park, and one of me and Harry in line for breakfast, where all you could see was the back of our heads. There was even one of me in the car, holding a stack of postcards in my hands. The photographer had caught me dreaming. Tobias Hawthorne hadn't known me, but he'd known about me. I might have been a very risky gamble. I might have been a part of the puzzle and not a player. But the billionaire had known that I could play. He hadn't entered this blindly and hoped for the best. He plotted and he planned, and I'd been part of that calculation. Not just Avery Kylie Grimes, born on the day that Tobias Hawthorne had died, but the girl in those photos. I thought about what Jameson had said, about that first night when he stepped from the fireplace into my room. Tobias Hawthorne had left me the fortune, and now he'd left them with me. Chapter 90. Early the next morning, Warren informed me that Skylar Hawthorne was leaving Hawthorne House. She was moving out, and Grayson had instructed security that she wasn't allowed to be back on the premises. Any idea why? Warren gave me a look that strongly suggested that he knew I was onto something. Oh, that he knew I knew something. I looked at him and lied. Not a clue. I found Grayson on the hidden staircase with the dating port. You kicked your mother out of the house? That wasn't what I'd expected him to do, and when he'd won our little wager. For better or worse, Sky was his mother. Family first. Mother left of her own will, Grayson said evenly. She was made to understand it was the better option. Better than being reported to the police. You won the bet, I told Grayson. You didn't have to. He turned and took a step up, so he was standing on the same stair as me. Yes, I did. If I were choosing between you and any one of them, he told me, I would choose them, always and every time. But he hadn't. Grayson. I was standing close to him, and the last time he'd stood on those stairs, I'd bared my wounds, literally. This time, I found my hands rising to his chest. He was arrogant and awful, and had spent the first week of our acquaintance dead set on making my life hell. He was still half in love with Emily, but from the moment I'd seen him, looking away had been nearly impossible. At the end of the day, he'd chosen me, over family, over his mother. Hesitantly, I'd let my hand find its way from his chest to his jaw. For a single second, he let me touch him, and then he turned his head away. I will always protect you, he told me, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed. You deserve to feel safe in your own home. And I'll help you with your foundation. I'll teach you what you need to know to make this life like you were born to it. But this, us, he swallowed. It can't happen, Avery. I've seen the way Jameson looks at you. He didn't say that he wouldn't let another girl come between them. He didn't have to. Chapter 91. I went to school, and when I came home, I called Max, knowing that she probably didn't even have her phone. My call got sent to voicemail. I tried her brother's phone and got sent to voicemail again. I didn't leave a message, but I did make plans to see what it would take for Lisa to send the entire Lee family first-class tickets to Australia. I couldn't travel until my time in Hawthorne House was up, but maybe Max could. I owed her. Feeling adrift and aching from what Grayson had said and the fact that Max wasn't there to process it with, I went looking for Libby. We seriously needed to get her a new phone, because a person could get lost in this place. I didn't want to lose anyone else. I might never have found her, but when I got close to the music room, I heard playing. I followed the music and found Libby sitting at the piano bench beside Nan. They both sat with their eyes closed, listening. Libby's black eye had finally faded away. Seeing her with Nan made me think about Libby's job back home. I couldn't ask her to just keep sitting around Hawthorne House every day, doing nothing. I wondered what Nash Hawthorne would suggest. I could ask her to put together a business plan, maybe a food truck, or maybe she would want to travel too. Until the will exited probate, I was limited to what I could do, but the fine people at McNamara, Ortega, and Jones had reason to want to stay on my good side. Eventually the money would be mine. Eventually it would exit the trust. Eventually, I'd be one of the richest and most powerful women in the world. The piano music ended, and my sister and Nan looked up and saw me. Libby did her best mother hen impression. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked me. "You don't look okay." I thought about Grayson and Jameson, about what I'd been brought here to do. "I'm fine," I told Libby, my voice steady enough that I could almost believe it. She wasn't fooled. "I'll make you something," she told me. "Have you ever had a quiche?" I'd never made a quiche. I had no real desire to try one, but baking was Libby's way of showing love. She headed for the kitchen. I went to follow, but Nan stopped me. "Stay," she ordered. There was nothing to do but obey. "I hear my granddaughter is leaving," Nan said tersely after letting me sweat it for a bit. I considered dissembling, but she'd pretty much proven that she wasn't the type for niceties. She tried to have me killed. Nan snorted. "Skye never did like to get her hands dirty herself. You ask me, if you're going to kill someone, you should at least have the decency to do it yourself and do it right." That was probably the strangest conversation I'd ever had in my life, and that was probably saying something. "Not that people are decent nowadays," Nan continued. "No respect, no self-respect, no grit." She sighed. If my poor Alice could see her children now. I wondered what it had been like for Skye and Zara, growing up in Hawthorne House, what it had been like for Toby. What twisted them into this? Your son-in-law changed his will after Toby died. I studied Nanny's expression, wondering if she'd know. "Toby was a good boy," Nan said gruffly, "until he wasn't." I wasn't sure what to make of that. Her hands went to a locket around her neck. "He was the sweetest child, smart as a whip. Just like his daddy, they used to say. But oh, that boy had a dose of me." "What happened?" I asked. Nan's expression changed. "It broke my Alice's heart. Broke all of us, really." Her fingers tightened around the locket and her hand shook. She set her jaw, then opened the locket. "Look at him," he told me. "Look at that sweet boy. He's 16 here." I leaned out to get a better look, wondering if Tobias Hawthorne II had resembled any of his nephews. What I saw took my breath away. "No. That's Toby?" I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. "He was a good boy," Nan said gruffly. I could barely hear her. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the picture. I couldn't speak, because I knew that man. He was younger than the picture, much younger. He was younger in the picture, much younger, but that face was unmistakable. "Eris?" A voice spoke up from the doorway. I looked to see Jameson standing there. He looked different than he had the past couple of days, lighter somehow, marginally less angry, capable of offering a lopsided half-smile to me. "What's got your pants in a twist?" I looked back down at the locket and sucked in a breath that scalded my lungs. "Toby," I managed. "I know him." "You what?" Jameson walked toward me. Beside me, Nan went very still. "I used to play chess with him in the park," I said. "Every morning." "Harry." "That's impossible," Nan said, her voice shaking. "Toby's been dead for 20 years. 20 years ago, Tobias Hawthorne had disinherited his family. What is this? What the hell is going on here?" "Are you sure, Eris?" Jameson was looking right beside me now. Oh, he was right beside me now. "I've seen the way Jameson looks at you," Grayson had said. "Are you absolutely certain?" I looked at Jameson. This didn't feel real. "I have a secret," I could hear my mother telling me, "about the day you were born." I reached for Jameson's hand and squeezed hard. "I'm sure." All right. Epilogue. Xander Hawthorne stared down at the letter, the way he had every day for a week. On the surface, it said very little. Alexander, well done. Tobias Hawthorne. Well done. He'd gotten his brothers to the end of the game. He'd gotten Avery there, too. He'd done exactly as he'd promised, but the old man made him a promise, too. When their game is done, yours will begin. Xander had never competed the way his brothers did, but oh, now he wanted to. He hadn't been lying when he told Avery that, just this once, he wanted to win. When they'd made it to the final room, when she'd opened the box, when he'd torn his envelope, he'd been expecting something, a riddle, a puzzle, a clue. All he'd received was, well done. Xander, Rebecca said softly beside him, what are we doing here? Sighing melodramatically, Thea sniped. Obviously. The fact that he'd gotten both of them here in the same room was a feat. He wasn't even sure why he'd done it, other than the fact that he needed a witness. Witnesses. If Xander was being honest with himself, he'd brought Rebecca because he wanted her there, and he brought Thea because if he hadn't, he would have been alone with Rebecca. There are many types of invisible ink, Xander told him. In the past few days, he held a match to the back of the page, heating its surface. He'd brought a UV light and gone to town. He'd tried every way he knew of masking a hidden message on the page, except for one. But there's only one kind, he'd continued evenly, that destroys the message after it's revealed. If he was wrong about this, it was over. There would be no game, no winning. Xander didn't want to do this alone. What exactly do you think we're going to find? Thea asked him. Xander looked at the letter one last time. Perhaps the old man's promise had been a lie. Perhaps to Tobias Hawthorne, Xander had only been an afterthought. But he had to try. He turned to the tub beside him. He filled it with water. Xander? Rebecca asked again, and her voice nearly ended him. Here goes nothing. Xander laid his letter gingerly on the surface of the water, then pressed down. At first, he thought he'd made a horrible mistake. He thought nothing was happening. Then, slowly, writing appeared, on either side of his grandfather's signature. Tobias Hawthorne, he'd signed it, no middle name. And now the reason for that omission was clear. The invisible ink darkened on the page. To the right of the signature, there were only two letters, equating to one Roman numeral, 2. And to the left, there was a word, find. Find Tobias Hawthorne II. Alright guys, that was it. We finished the Inheritance games. Do you guys want to hear the sequel? Let me know, and feel free to comment your thoughts. Or you can leave your message in the Discord too.